Okay. So this first 30 seconds is just me making sure that it's actually recording, and it looks like it is. So
okay. So this first 30
get right
seconds
into it.
is just me making sure that it's
so this is Civ.
recording.
Right now I'm playing as France, so my capital is Paris. These are some other cities I've got. I moved a little bit ways into the game because I wanted to be able to get right into
so
it,
this is Civ. Right now
rather than spending a lot of time trying to prepare, because the beginning of the game you only start off with 2 units, no cities, and it would take me a few hours before I could even get to the things I could talk about. So rather than having you watch a 2-hour video, I just got a ways into it already. So the first thing I wanted to do is just quickly talk about the limitations of the game, and so sort of give you an idea of what you're not going to see. The first thing that I want to talk about is that this is actually the basic Civ game. There is DLC for other things that I do not actually own, and because I don't own the DLC, obviously I can't really talk about what's in it because I've never played it. One of the big DLCs that is relevant to this is one that adds religion to the game. There are no religions in this game. The closest thing or at least in this version of the game, the closest thing I've got to that is there's a piety tree that is focused on getting culture, which I'll talk about later. But there is there's no religion in the game as far as what I own, unfortunately. So you're not going to hear a whole lot on like Weber, Durkheim, people who use religion very heavily in their works, just because I don't have religion to go off of. The other thing that you're not going to hear about is there's not going to be any general will here, because naturally, because this is a game, it wants the player to be the main focus. What you do, what you decide, needs to get done, and naturally that means that there's no general will. So you're not going to hear about that from Rousseau, because if there was a general will and that went counter to what I wanted, we'd get a bit of conflict of interest where you wouldn't really be able to play the game because your citizens want something else, and that would be very difficult to actually program and things like that. The other thing, the limitations just of video games, or at least this video game in general, is that because it's designed to be a strategy game looking from the top down, you're looking at a civilization level. So I'm not going to see any individual thinking. You're not going to find motives that are important for things like what Durkheim talks about. And then also, as you can see in the upper left here, I'm getting like gold as in my total nation's gold. I don't actually see things like classes. I don't know what the class breakdowns are for my society. So unfortunately, we're also not going to be able to talk a whole lot about Tocqueville and Marx. So that brings me into there are 3 guys that I'm really going to be not talking about the most. They might show up a little bit, but not a whole lot. Tocqueville, because there's not a whole lot of like society. I'm not going to be able to see how my society impacts how individuals work, because I'm only looking at the civilization as a whole. There's also no religion, and there's no voting. However, there's one exception to him, and that's why I wanted to bring that up first, and that's that he does say in his book that there's a choice being made between freedom and order, and in this in the social policies tree, if you decide to go down the freedom branch, you do cut off your access to the order branch. You also cut off your access to the autocracy. You have to pick one of these 3. The other 2 are piety and rationalism. Cut each other off. But ultimately, these 2 branches are just different play styles. You don't see a whole lot of his theories in either of them, so I decided not to go into it too much. Also, like I said, Weber, because there's no religion and we don't see individuals very much to see what, like, if they're working hard or things like that, and that was most of his book. We're not going to see him. Also, Durkheim, there's no suicide in the game. I'm in 80 AD right now. You start off at 3600 BC or something like that. So over these long spans of time, the suicide rates you wouldn't really notice them, and so instead it's just worked into how population works, I would imagine. But we'll get all to that later. So basically how I'm going to do this is I'm going to go over a few of the core game elements. Now I'm going to apply the authors that I found relevant, and then I'm going to conclude with, I think, what this sort of means for our assumptions as a society. One quick note that I want to make is that I'm not going to be going over everything that's in the game, just the ones that I thought people really would have something to say about. So first off, I want to talk about happiness. Happiness we can see over here in the upper left. My total happiness right now is 12. Happiness as a game mechanic is something that you want in society naturally. If you have negative happiness, you start to create unhappiness, which has a bunch of bad effects. And happiness starts to fill up this meter here for golden ages. First thing I want to talk about is one of the biggest ways to get happiness, and that is through commodities. So right now you can see I am getting +4 happiness from gems, +4 from ivory, +4 from sugar, and +4 from cotton. That's because right here I'm farming ivory, here I've got gems, cotton, and I'm sure there's sugar somewhere else, like down here. And each of those grant me happiness. Now, this is incredibly related to Adam Smith because all of these, I mean, except you could argue sugar, I guess, are ultimately worthless. Or cotton for clothing, but you know, ultimately these aren't really super valuable things. You can be getting replacements relatively easy, but we want them belt buckles. You know, but the impact of this, because, for example, I started off in Paris, that only had gems. I quickly expanded to get cotton and more gems and the ivory down here. But if I was not playing so aggressive early on, I would have never gotten sugar. There's also other things like marble, I don't have. There's whales that I don't even see on the map. And I'm not getting access to any of the happiness from any of those. Now here's the thing. Having these 3 gems doesn't grant me 12 happiness. I only get 4. It doesn't stack. However, I have 3 units of gems. So what am I naturally going to do with those extra gems? Well, I'm probably going to try and talk to this guy, how do you ever pronounce that guy's name, to try and get some of his marble, so that I can increase the happiness of my nation. Now, this encourages trade without actually forcing you to trade. This goes straight into Adam Smith's invisible hand, because if everyone is acting in their best interest, they're naturally going to start trading with everyone around them, because they want to increase the happiness so they can get to golden ages. Golden ages increase production, which allows you to get buildings, get resources faster. So it's very good to be in a golden age, and in order to do that, I need to get as much happiness as possible. So I want to trade with everyone. One detail about that's interesting is that the game actually sides about, or rather with Adam Smith over Locke, though, because Locke believes that the major point when this started to happen was once I got currency. However, when I go to the research tree, which you can see here, currency is right here. I could have been trading all the way back here if I had the resources. Well, probably not until I actually was mining them, which I would need trapping and mining for. But I didn't need to get all the way to currency to start trading. So, whereas Locke believes that the invention of currency is what really caused trade to explode and become a huge thing, it sides with Adam Smith in that it existed on a smaller scale before currency. Currency just helps it out. Because as you've gotten farther in the game, naturally you're more inclined to be able to trade things because you have more and things like that. But currency is just a way to make this more efficient. Also, if I were to open up a trade menu, with, for example, Odu Nobunaga, you can see once I've gotten currency and gold, I can offer to trade things like that. But before then, I usually would just go with gems and marble, and I can propose and things like that. So it very much encourages trading even before you have currency. The other thing with this pursuit of ultimately useless things is, naturally, this ties very closely into Marx's fetishism of commodities, where we all want to get these ultimately useless things, and we assign value to them way higher than what they actually are, because I don't do anything with gems, but they give me happiness. However, the reason that I put this closer to Adam Smith is that Marx believed that over time, the government would eventually start to go away. Now, this isn't directly related to his fetishism of commodities, but part of his theory as a whole, he believed that the government would eventually start to slip away and form small communes. That never happens in this game. At this point, you wouldn't be able to see it because obviously we're in 80 AD, but if I were to take us all the way down the research tech into future tech, this is like when you're in like the years 2200, you still only actually get stronger governments. You're never actually going back to a commune. So I wanted to put this more with Adam Smith. One of the questions that's going to keep coming up about this is whether or not that, or not just specifically this, but with all of these applications of the game itself, is whether or not this is a mechanic of the game or an innate assumption. It would make sense that this would be a mechanic, because if your government started breaking down into smaller communes, it would be very difficult to run it as a player, but it also could be considered an assumption that we just, when we think of our societies, we don't expect it to fall apart into smaller communes, or rather not fall apart, but to start to fracture and lose a centralization. It's hard to see the centralization here, but I've built roads all the way from all of my cities to Paris, because everything I need it to connect to Paris, because I get huge benefits for that through trade routes. And so there's still a very heavy focus on having centralization in the game. And so I put that one closer on the assumption side, just because I think that you would expect, most people wouldn't expect that, or wouldn't believe that the further you get in the game, after a certain point, the less control you'd have as the centralized power. And that is, I guess, an important thing to note, that you are playing as whatever leader of this country you have. So, for example, I showed you Oda Nobunaga. This is England. Elizabeth, she is the leader of the country. She makes all the decisions. So that's part of where I was talking about the general will won't show up. I'm playing as France. I'm playing as Napoleon. Napoleon's will is law. There is no other decision makers in here. So you always have the same amount of control, and as your government expands, you never lose any of that. So the next thing, anyway, with regard to happiness that I wanted to talk about was actually one of the things that detracts from happiness. And you can see the 35 total unhappiness from all sources. 10.8 is being generated from the number of cities, and 24.51 from population. So, first thing to note from that is that having more cities makes you less happy. So I actually prepared a guy down here to build a city. He's going to build a city, and now you can see my happiness drop down to 10. This fits in with Ibn Khaldun's belief on how you lose sort of the group feeling the more you expand. The same thing with the population. As population goes up, unfortunately, because you have no control really over how the population increases, it's just this green bar right here. This one's going to increase in 3 days, this one's going to increase in 2 days. I can't really force that to happen faster or slower. I couldn't really give you a demonstration. But having higher population and having more cities both decrease how happy your people are. So that ties in with what he's saying, because you lose some of that happiness, some of that group feeling as you expand, as you become less unified. For example, I've got this random city down here that's not even close to where I originated. My overall happiness of the country goes down. Now, the one thing this doesn't have is that you would expect the happiness of this group to be lower than, for example, this group, Orleans, just because this one's much closer. But if we're taking an average, we